Hey guys, Cade Wilcox here, host of the Primitive Podcast. Thank you for joining this week's episode. We're joined by Marcylle Combs. Marcylle Combs has owned and operated multiple businesses, the main one being over a 15-year period of time. She owned Accolade Home Healthcare, had almost 800 employees, and grew it to nearly 40 offices in 15 years. It was a real pleasure to interview her and talk to her about her experience as an entrepreneur and as a leader. As always, thank you for joining the Primitive Podcast and for being a faithful listener. Thank you so much. Marcel, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I really appreciate our mutual friend, Kathy Crockett, introducing us, and appreciate you taking the time to join the podcast. So those who listen to the podcast who don't know Marcylle Combs, can you tell us a bit about your background and your story, and just give us some insight into that?
Sure, Cade. It's an honor to be with you today, and I am so happy that I'll be just flying out to your area tomorrow to Lubbock, Texas for a couple meetings.
Awesome.
It's happy to be here in person, and I'm hoping the wind is not blowing 800 miles an hour. Last time I was there last month, it was, I think, 40 degrees, and I think the wind might have been blowing at 40.
There's a really good chance of that.
or miles per hour, and I was not prepared for that coming from the Dallas area. Let's just say that. So a little bit about my background. I do have 5 children, and they are all grown now, and they were delightful people. I did manage to stay married to one amazing man, and that's probably why I managed to stay married to him, because he is an amazing, brilliant guy in his own right. So in our journey, we were in partnerships with that, if you will. So my undergraduate degree is as a registered nurse. So I went right through high school, right through college, got out, said, I'm going to work in the bedside. I'm going to work with patients one-on-one, and I'm never going to sit behind a desk, and I'm never going to just do paperwork and that kind of thing all day long. That might be one of my themes to say to you. In your 22-year-old self, when you graduate from college, or even when you're younger than that, if you choose a different path, it's probably going to lead you somewhere you didn't expect to be, but that journey can be a delightful one. I said I might have been an accidental career person early on. I think somewhere in my being, I was always going to be an entrepreneur. It's always going to be someone who had their own business or their own thing in some way. But I had that planned out in my mind's eye a lot further down the line than it actually happened. So my husband, we moved to Lubbock, Texas, and my husband was working on his PhD. And at that time, I had 4 little children, and unfortunately, they all needed to eat on a regular basis. So due to a lot of events, I needed to go back to work. And I had never worked with elderly. I'd always done labor and delivery and neonatal intensive care, the happy part, if you will, the happiest or saddest part of the hospital. But I met someone in that journey that was doing home care. And I was curious with them. I think I was always kind of a born teacher too. I like that sort of thing. So she was carrying at that time, you'll see how old this is, a beeper. And I said, what do you do with that thing? And she said, well, I'm able to go out in people's home and I teach them, and we do skilled care, some kind of medical treatment for them. And it's a great part-time job. And from that, my journey really began. That led me to business. I worked for an agency, and that owner decided to sell the agency. And I felt this compelling, overwhelming need. I had helped him grow that. And I had this overwhelming need that I wanted to do that. Now, I wanted to buy it. I had no money. We had 4 kids, Craig was still working on his PhD. And, there was no reason for me to be able to do that. But really, through his faith in me, and I think I also was a pretty key part of the business then, decided that he would help me, and he would, in essence, support me in that effort, and backed me in financing, and I bought that business. It was, I will say, in nursing school, you don't have a business class. You do have some math classes, but they're statistics. And they also are, how do you calculate drug dosages? And at that point in class, we had to do that sort of thing. So I really didn't have any of that. So I'd never been taught how to read a profit and loss statement. Everything I kind of knew, I either knew by asking lots of irritating questions to lots of people, or I learned in a book, one of the two. And I had great friends and support people who were my accountants, some of which are in Lubbock, Texas. And I had people who would just take the time to teach me about those sort of things. Within a couple years, I sold that business, and then I formed what would become my career, Foundation Management Services, and owned that until 2018, when I sold that and Accolade Home Care. I first had a big contract with the hospital, then moved on to going back out into a direct provider of home care and hospice. And I did that until 2018. And then in 2018, I sold. The business was really large. We had 39 offices, and we had 750 employees. I loved the work, and I loved the people, and I loved what I was doing. I'm a person of faith, so I had a faith-based business, even though it was a for-profit business.
For sure.
No, and we had people of all faiths, and some people of no faiths who worked with us.
Right.
But my goal was to love all of them. So, and then I just couldn't hardly stand it. So I went back in business, in a consulting business that I have right now called Mac Legacy. And I have some commercial properties, which, at the time seemed, as I said to you earlier when our pre-conversation, at the time they seemed like a really smart move. I'm a really smart gal, in COVID and what people are doing after it. Perhaps not so smart, but cycles. So I'm doing a few other things on the side, like building a house and,
Stay busy.
all kinds of personal and professional sorts of things.
How long did you lead Accolade?
From 2000, we started in 2003, and I sold in 2018.
15 years. So let's think about that for a moment. Like, how'd you see your role as a leader there? So you started that from the ground up? Like you started with no clients and no employees, and grew it over 15 years to almost 40 locations and 700 plus employees. So I'm sure you saw your role as a leader in multiple ways throughout those 15 years. And so feel free to kind of answer it as generally as you want, but when you think back to that time, how did you see your role as a leader?
My personal, mission or responsibility. I'm a big John Maxwell follower, and if you know who he is, if not, you should look him up. But I felt like as a leader of the company, I needed to be someone that I wanted to work for. And that in that role, I had a motto, and it was real simple. And that was come to work every day with a smile on your face. And the day that you don't want to be here, then you should go. And that was, just fundamental to us in whatever we did was quality. Whatever that looked like, it had to be a quality product, a quality follow-up. We needed to be people that um, that we would want in our own homes. My my initial response as a leader was to trust them on face value, but expect more of them than they would expect of themselves. So I really believe in promotion within. I really believe in education. So everything I could do to help people perhaps achieve more than they felt like they could achieve themselves. Had lots of, my philosophy has always been to have lots of young college grads. One is it helps you not be so stuck in a rut, even if they drive you crazy. And two is it helps, you're just helping them, get to a point where they're going to shape the future. And that's where it's really all about, is someday the people that you're training will be training someone else. And that, I always felt I should work harder than anyone else there, and sometimes that, and be willing to do whatever they were willing to do. So, for me as a leader, I don't really think you get a day off as a leader. And the higher up you are in a company, the fewer confidence you can have, because you have to portray an image that we can do this. And I will say, if someone came to my office with a problem, I would say to them, what is your solution? So don't come in here and expect me to solve your problems. I may not completely agree with your answer, but you need to come with an answer to your problem, versus I say it's kind of the vomiting thing. Excuse me if this is a non-clinical audience, which I'm sure is. They come in and they throw up all over your office and they leave and they feel better, but you are left with this mess.
Yeah.
So the goal to get people to grow is to allow them some room to make mistakes, but also a bar for them to try to follow, that they can't easily achieve.
It's really good. What do you see your responsibility as it relates to vision? Particularly 15 years sounds like a long time, but if you've ever ran a business, that really goes by really fast. So that growth was really rapid in the reality of actually leading a business. And so what did you see as your responsibility related to vision, and what did that practically look like for you? Did you set time aside to do that? How'd you do that with your team? What role did vision have as the leader of your organization?
Well, I love new projects. I always say I bore easily. So I love a new project, whatever that project is. I mean, give me a new project, I'm all in. I have learned that you can't leave the people in the dust that's behind you, because there are and I've learned this over the years. There are a lot of people who can follow the path, but there's very few people who can create the path. And I believe that can be learned, but there has to be certain personalities who love doing that. So my far setting aside, I like small brainstorming groups, so I would allow time. I don't think a good group, the core of it in my mind would never be over 12 people, but preferably would be 5 to 6. And then that's not to say as that project gets along the way that you don't need to bring in other pockets of people, but too many voices is too much. I also set aside a time for the leadership, more than just working on a project, but the leadership of the companies would come together and just get to know each other. I just heard something about the Supreme Court justices that I thought was brilliant, is that they set aside a time, and I could have this wrong, once a month, and they come together just as a group to just eat together and fellowship together, if you will. But they're not allowed to talk about cases, and they're not allowed to talk about politics. But I think that's a great example. You need to get people outside of their normal environment to do that. I also, for the largest offices, because I love a new project and I love strategic planning, if you will. So I would bring them in for 2 days from all over the state, diverse people, but key people, to just set aside. And in 2 days, we would have their strategic plan made for the next year. What their strengths and weaknesses, what their failures and successes were, what the challenges were, and then set out a particular goal of what number we needed to hit. And then it's more in the mechanics of how you get there. I had a CFO tell me one time, and he was mega hospitals. He said, a CEO has a hard time making a transition to the COO, because a CFO just sees the numbers on the paper. He doesn't see the possibilities of tomorrow. The COO or the CEO sees the possibilities of tomorrow. And that you have to look beyond what's just on the paper. And you have to have some time to do that. And of course, I believe in fun, that you should have a good time every day, because you never know when it might be your last on this earth. So, I would try to do something fun during that period of time.
That's cool.
Give them fun goals. People are motivated by a lot of different things, not all money. I find that hard to believe that not everyone's motivated by money. But things that they would be, interested in.
Yeah, that's good. How did you treat failure, throughout your leadership journey and throughout starting businesses and helping grow companies and start companies and manage companies? What's been your approach to really learning from failure and how you practically treat it?
Oh, I never fail. My approach really to failure is, I think that if you're not having some failures along the way, you really aren't trying hard enough. Now, your goal is to modify that failure. So, because if you have a big enough failure, then the ladder to get back up is a lot harder. And I think it doesn't matter how many times you fall down, it matters how many times you get up. So if something isn't working, then you have to stop and regroup and go another direction. That's not keeping to your goals, or it's not the exception of not focusing on that. It's that you are going to experience some failures, and it is going to be really hard. I have 5 children. I have 4 sons. I have, and they're all a mix of your personalities in their own. But I have one who's been doing some business ventures, and I just said, there are many, many days. I remember when I bought my first business, and one day I had no debt, and the next day was $1 billion in debt, and I had about 200 employees or 150 that were depending upon me for like a paycheck. Imagine that. So, I was a little terrified of not so much. I didn't have any money when I started. So to lose all your money if you don't have any money, 0 equals it's a little easier when you're younger and you don't have those kind of things there. And I kind of knew I would always be able to have a job. But, so many times I would wake up and feel like we're not going to do it tomorrow. And I work in a service industry. So when I sold, our payroll was about 1.2 million every 2 weeks. So unfortunately, I couldn't just write a check out for that. Or make it up or not take a check myself. And that would, at that point, there's a lot of other factors. And there were times in the past that I did mortgage my retirement, and I did do all those things because the people needed to get paid.
Yeah.
It always looks, when you're looking back and you have some degree of success, people think it looks easy. It's always hard. Fun. As I said, I've had, I've created the best friends and had the most fun ever doing this business. and multiple businesses.
Yeah.
So
That's great. How did you treat your own personal growth? Like, how'd you stay inspired? How'd you prevent, just focusing on putting out all the fires, and, how did you ensure that you were growing and you were staying inspired as a leader?
well, early on, it wasn't very hard to figure out that I needed to learn a whole lot more every single day because I didn't know anything. So that that was one thing. I knew how to show up, how to follow up, how to make sure I kept my word, and if I couldn't keep my word, to go back and you know do whatever I could to say this is why I didn't. However, I really believe in personal growth. And so one thing is, and I talk a lot to female leaders and just my struggle with financing being the woman. My husband and I didn't do this business together. We're very different, and he has his own path. He went to Iraq a couple times, and he had his own path in the military. So for me, it was independent in whatever I had to do. He was my great supporter from a personal level. But for my personal growth, I'm a big reader, and I don't think you can be a leader without being a reader. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to sit and read a book that's, 1,000 pages long and boring to death. I have to read a lot of federal regs. I don't really, if you want cures for insomnia, but to go ask for financing, to lead my people, to try to be a leader in the industry and know everything I could know about getting people's care, I had to read the stuff I didn't want to read. Now, I love to read novels. I just finished a novel that's based on a true story called The Indigo Girl, and it was or The Indigo Woman. I'd have to look it up. But I love that. But I also, in my later years, as I got some degree of success, I tried to put myself in groups because I'm really comfortable in the home care and hospice space, really comfortable on a national level or on a state level. So I had to find some other groups that I was really uncomfortable in. And as much as people think I'm a natural extrovert, I'm really not. And I do love people, and I love that kind of thing, but I don't walk in a room and think, I'm so glad to be amongst 100 people I've never met before at a reception. So I went back and got my master's when I was in my 50s, and that was through Kathy Crockett and LCU. LCU had a master's in leadership program then. And so 6 of us, our executives, I talked them into going with me, went and we spent 3 years doing our master's program online. And I also participate in some of John Maxwell's small groups. I went to Dave Ramsey's group. Anywhere I could. And I'm currently I'm finishing up a book just about my own particular management style. So I think it's important for you to be excellent in what you do. You have to learn everything there is to know about it. And to be excellent, you have to continually put yourself in groups that you're uncomfortable in, that you think maybe automatically they're all smarter than you. And I tell you, I still do that, and I still don't like it. But how am I gonna, I want to be the last day that I take a breath on this earth to be the last day I learn something new. And I'm never gonna know. It's just remarkable. The things people know. I've been building a house, so building a house, I wouldn't suggest it, but I don't know hardly anything about making a structure stand up and not fall down. Very, very little information do I have there, and I marvel at the people who know how to do that.
That's good. What things, or when you think about back through your career, what things or who are a few people that have the greatest impact on your leadership journey? And maybe what are some of the things that really stick out to you in terms of why those things or why those people influenced you?
Oh gosh, as I said, there's been so many people that believed in me. My mentor, who I bought my first business from, I'll never forget that. I mean, again, this was in the 90s, early 90s. So, um, it was a little different wage time too. But I remember he asked me, "Do you have any financial goals?" And I said, "Well, I would love to have $6 million in the bank, free and clear, with no debt." And most of my friends said, "Are you crazy? Like, you're a nurse. You're never going to be able to do that." And what he said was, "Marcel, that's not near enough." And I thought, that's not near enough. One, what that said to me was, you could probably do this. And two, is that wasn't the ceiling. Sometimes I know John Maxwell. Recently, I was in a small group with him last year. I went to London with him, and I went with one of his small groups with his nonprofit called Equip. And he was talking about the problem with goals is that they're a ceiling. So I've had to say, okay, if I hit this goal, where's the ceiling above that? Or where do I need to sit down and say, okay, I need goals, stretch goals I can't reach. Where are those? So really, my first business mentor, he told me the importance of billing and collecting, knowing where your money is every day. I have a good friend who is an attorney in Dallas. She is, probably 5 foot tall and 100 pounds soaking wet, but she is a fierce woman. And she is all about, we might be on different sides politically, but we're on the same side heart-wise. And she was really someone who helped me walk through the Medicare legalities in so many ways. I had an attorney who was just another attorney who was just a small town lawyer who actually helped me with my adoption of my daughter. But more than that, he was a fierce defender of me. I've not had that since. It's not that I don't have attorneys and they're good, but he, from a business perspective, he just believed in me and nobody was going to hurt me. And I had a CIO, which, computer people, they're interesting. But he was not your average personality, but he died a few years ago of cancer, but he taught me so much about just computers and the cloud, because when I first heard about this cloud, I thought, where is that? I don't know where that touch it again. I mean, I know, and I know most people don't even think about what you're in, but he would take the time to teach me. And as I said, I've mentioned John Maxwell several times. He's a great leader, a great force. He's now in his 70s, but he still does so much. And he's taught me so much about being responsible, being connected, so many people along the way.
Yeah. Well, I hear that. I mean, there's two things I keep hearing you refer to in just kind of multiple levels, and that is you seem to have really surrounded yourself by a lot of really great people, right? You're able to acknowledge what your strengths are, and the strengths you don't have, and therefore you've surrounded yourself with these great people. And then you just seem to be really curious, kind of always learning, and I think that says a lot about your leadership. My last question for you is, if you could speak to your younger self, 15, 20, 30 years ago, what advice would you give yourself then based on what you know now?
Oh goodness, take a business course. helped me a lot. I think if I talked to my younger self, maybe I would say, don't worry so much. And it's something you learn along the way. And I am a person of faith, so you need to take this in that context. That I sometimes, instead of staying up all night and fretting yourself to death about something that you're really not making steps toward, just hold God's hand and walk forward. And that's what we all have to do when the day is done, is to focus on that. That's somehow, when you pass really hard things, you don't think you're going to live on the other side of that. For me, I felt a great deal of responsibility for a great many people. And I can't stand in the way of God working in their life either. Whether they believe in God or not doesn't really matter. But I can't be all to everyone. And I was always, if you understand nurses, a lot of times we take on the responsibility, things that are really not ours to own. So I don't know if I would have made any difference in that young girl. But that's probably what I would say to her, is perhaps you should take a few more business classes. Couldn't have gotten me to do it then.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to do that, and I was stubborn and strong-willed and outspoken like any good Texas woman.
That's good. That's good. Well, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you for sharing all your insight and the knowledge you've learned over the years, and just really appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
And Cade, thank you. And thanks, a shout out to Kathy Crockett. You didn't ask me about contact information, but if anyone needs to, see anything that I'm up to, it's on Instagram, Marcylle_Combs, and Facebook, it's Marcylle Combs Company. And on website, it's marcellecombs.com. So if you can spell my first and last name, you can probably find me. Thank you so much, Craig.
Thank you.